Hello, welcome to the first in this series then. So the first song that we're looking at in this series of lessons is My Creole Belle by Mississippi John Hurt. This is a really great beginner piece. It's a fairly straightforward fingerstyle piece. The versions of songs that I will do as close to the original performer as I can. So this is very close to Mississippi John Hurt's version if you listen to his piece, which is on YouTube. Okay, so without any further ado, let's look at the key learning points. However, actually, before I go too much further, there is one point that I want to make, and this will be the case for all of the lessons that I do. I'm not going to do one of those kind of monkey see, monkey do videos where I teach you to put your finger in all these different places and you sort of laboriously copy what I do. That's not what I'm going to be doing. I know the majority of YouTube lessons are like that. This one is not like that. There is that phrase that goes something along the lines of, if you give a person a fish, then they'll eat for a day. If you teach someone how to fish, then they can eat for a lifetime. So that's my philosophy. What I want to do today and in subsequent lessons is show you how to teach yourself. So we're going to be making good use of tab. We're going to be talking about all the top tips to learn and watch out for, and hints and guidance on the techniques that are used, so that you can then use the resources that accompany this video to then effectively teach yourself. Okay, let's have a look at the very first key learning point. So as this is the first lesson in this series, the first thing I want to talk about is the guitar. Obviously, it's an acoustic guitar is what you need. These pieces, generally speaking, don't work too well on electric guitars. So ideally you want an acoustic guitar. This is a steel string guitar, but if you've got a nylon strung guitar, that's fine. And what's important is that the guitar that you use should be comfortable for you to play. You should be happy with it, and it should be correctly set up. It doesn't have to be an expensive guitar. It doesn't have to be a guitar especially for fingerstyle. There's not really any such thing, although, you know, advanced players will have their preferences for their body size, neck thickness, neck width, and those sorts of things. Okay, but for the purposes of this lesson and other lessons in this series, a guitar that you're comfortable with, that's correctly set up and with new or relatively new strings, is what you need. If you don't know whether it's set up correctly or not, then take it to a shop or take it to a guitar tech, someone who can give you advice and guidance, and just get them to look at it. The chances are they'll look at it for free, and if they don't think there's anything that they can do in terms of adjustments, then you might not have to pay anything at all. However, if your guitar does need setting up, so for example, if the string height is too high for efficient playing, or if the intonation is incorrect, i.e. the strings go out of tune as you play up the strings, then you'll need a setup, and a good tech will do that for you. Playing a guitar or an instrument that is not comfortable and is hard work and doesn't sound very nice just takes the joy out of music. And unfortunately, there's a rather sort of sorry irony that the cheaper guitars often are the most uncomfortable to play, but of course they are the ones that beginners buy when they first start out. So get an instrument that you're comfortable with. Okay, next key learning point that I want to talk about is understanding the tablature. Learning tab is a really key thing to being able to play effectively and learn and understand the technical or the more technical aspects of a piece of music. So if we look at the tab that we've got for Creole Belle, one of the first things that I want to point out, or one of the first things that I would advise is go through the piece and start trying to get a feel for the piece of music. Now, actually with this piece, it's only around about 8 bars long. After the first 8 bars, the progression just repeats with some slight variations. So knowing that you've only got 8 bars to learn is quite reassuring. And then the other thing to point out is the bass line. Now, the bass line is going to be a real signature aspect of this piece of music and other subsequent pieces that we do. It's a real key aspect of Travis picking style of music. And you'll see that we've got this alternating bass line. And if you look at the tab, if you look at the classical notation, you'll see that the notes that have got the stems pointing down, that is the bass line. So that is the way to distinguish the bass line from the other notes. Now that's important to understand, because what you don't want to do is have your thumb playing melody notes and your fingers playing the bass notes. Okay, we need to make sure that we've got a distinct role for the thumb. The other thing to notice is most of the notes fall on the quarter notes. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Most of the song is actually fairly straightforward on those beats. So what you will notice is that on bar 2, we've got a little 8th note that comes on the 2 and. There it is. 1, 2 and. 1, 2 and. 1, 2 and. Okay, so look out for those. They are going to be possibly or probably as a beginner, probably the trickier bits to learn, because you're going to have to get those in there in between the sort of the 1, 2, 3, 4, in between the bass notes. Okay, so look out for those and make sure that you include them. They are the aspects that give the character to the melody, so they are important. Okay, the next key learning point that I want to make is the efficiency of your left hand. Now, this is a fairly basic beginner piece, so there's not too much to talk about, and luckily you can play this song with open chords that you should know. It's basically C, F, G. However, it's a good idea that we start thinking about just modifying some of these chord shapes. If you're still playing the classic C shape and the classic G and the classic F, kind of the basic chords that you get taught as a beginner, then we need to add in a few bits and pieces. Because of that bass line, we really need to be able to play the G on the 3rd fret of the E string. That's part of that opening couple of chords with the C chord. We can place the little finger on the C, the 3rd fret of the A string, and we can use the 3rd finger on the G, the 3rd fret of the E string. So now we've got a C chord that has got the G in the bass, which means when we're playing that bass line, we've already got a finger on the G string. We're not having to sort of manipulate the fingers to try and play that bass line. So that's one of the things I would suggest is just modifying your open C chord to include that G in the bass. In a similar way, with your G chord, you may have learned a classic kind of position, such as what I'm doing at the moment. What far better idea is to learn to play the G chord with your using your little finger on the top E string at the 3rd fret, and leave your 1st finger free. Now, the reason why we want to do that is because in this song we've got some little melody lines. Some little melody lines that use that forefinger. If you've got it set up like that, it's then very hard to get yourself to the 1st fret on the top E string, okay? Whereas if we play the G position like that, our finger is then free, okay? So just one thing to get used to there. And then finally, the F shape or the F chord. It's a very common technique for fingerstyle players and Travis picking players to use their thumb over the top. It's probably, in inverted commas, bad technique from a teaching and classical point of view, but it is a technique that's very common. It may take a bit of getting used to. If you've not done it before, you may need to just practice that, and you might find that you even get a bit of stress and strain on your thumb there. If that starts to happen, or if you start feeling pain, stop. Just take a little bit each day and build up to it. Do not overstress yourself. The last thing we want to be doing is not enjoying playing the instrument. That's the opposite of what we want to be doing. Okay, but by putting the thumb over the top there, a little bit like that C chord, we've then got the F note in the bass line, i.e. the F note on the 1st fret of the E string. You can do a bar chord as well, and in fact you may say, well, why not just do a bar chord? The reason for it is just, again, a bit more efficiency. If you use the bar chord, you'll be using quite a lot of pressure to put that finger down across the bar there, and actually that's just wasting kind of energy and effort, really. It's actually easier, it saves a bit of energy by putting your thumb over the top there, and that's the reason for that. Okay, so that's that key learning point, learning to change and modify the chords to suit the piece of music. Okay, so the fourth key learning point that I want to mention is that alternating bass. Now, really, this is probably the fundamental aspect of the whole song, and will certainly become a fundamental technique that you'll use in other fingerstyle pieces as well. Now, it's a really important thing that your thumb learns to play the bass line. But the way you play the bass line and the way that you hit the string is quite important to make sure that we get a muted effect. Now, what I would say is there are different players online. I've had some coaching actually from some quite well-known players in the past, and their technique often is to really, it's a really muted effect, and they're really kind of whacking that bass, and it sounds quite spanky and wacky sounding, which I think it sounds great if that's your style, but personally I don't think that's essential. And it's possibly a matter of taste. But what is important is that you're able to control that tone, that level of mutedness. I prefer slightly lighter muting. Something along those sorts of lines, okay? But the way you achieve that is by putting the palm of your hand on the strings just ahead of the bridge, very lightly. And you'll need to experiment with that. So probably before you even start this piece of music, one of the things you're going to have to do is sit down and practice that bass line. Go very slowly. My demonstration actually is too fast. Go a lot slower. And you want that consistent. You want the volume of each note to be consistent. You want the timing to be consistent. So when it comes to timing, use a metronome or use the play along version of the song that I've put on as a separate video in the resources of this lesson. Okay, so key learning point is that thumb. One thing I would say as well, you'll find other players will talk about thumb separation, and I've in the past found that confusing. It almost makes it sound like the thumb is capable of playing a different tempo to the rest of the fingers, that it's somehow independent from the rest of the fingers. Actually, that I think is the opposite really. What we're really talking about is the thumb has got separation from what the other fingers are playing. And you'll find that when you first start learning some of these pieces, when your fingers, your first and second finger start playing some of the melody lines, you might find that actually they start pulling the thumb away, or your thumb relaxes, or it can't play. You can't concentrate on playing with the fingers at the same time as the thumb. Okay, so what we're really talking about is coordinating all of the fingers depending on how many fingers you end up using. On that note, again, a matter of preference, and different players will have different sort of ways of doing things. I tend to use all of my fingers apart from my little finger for playing. Okay, so all of the fingers need separation to some degree or another, and what we're really talking about with thumb separation is actually coordinating the thumb such that it is doing the job of a consistent alternating bass, whilst the other fingers can play the melody notes as required. And I'll give you some more tips on that in a second. Okay, so they are our key learning points. So 4 of them today are: make sure that your guitar is comfortable and correctly set up. Okay, the next thing is make sure that you look at the tab and start understanding the tab, reviewing the tab, and getting a feel for what you're playing. Third is think about the chords and the fingering position. So again, when looking at the tab, perhaps before you start playing, start imagining where you might have to put your fingers. Do you need to modify any chord positions? Can you be more efficient with your finger technique, and so on? And that will become something that, again, will be a feature of most of these songs. You might have to think about just modifying where you put your fingers to play things. And then my final key learning point is that alternating bass. It's a fundamental part of the piece of music. I don't want to get too hung up on it at this stage, but suffice to say that it needs to be consistent, it needs to be even, and it needs to be in time. What I also will give with each video are top tips for the specific piece of music that we're working on at the moment. So my top tips then, we've already talked about playing the bass line and playing it consistently, but also make sure that you're playing the correct bass note, okay? And I mentioned earlier about identifying the bass notes on the tab. Practice playing the bass line correctly and making sure that you're getting the right order. You always want to be starting on the root note first, okay, as a general rule, okay? So my tip for this one really is, as I mentioned earlier, play along to the metronome or play along to the play along piece in the resources to this lesson, and really start getting a feel for that thumb. Okay, so my next top tip is to break everything down into little bite-sized chunks. Don't make the mistake that I used to years ago of trying to learn a whole piece of music in one day and then realizing that it felt hopeless, thinking that I was no good at it, and then I would give up. And actually, that was being way too ambitious. The idea with this course is that we will learn one piece of music a month. Okay, so a little bit of daily practice. So for example, in your first session, when you sit down, just set yourself the little goal of learning the first bar. And the first bar is based on that C chord. So make sure that you go nice and slowly, position the C chord, and make sure that you've got it all fretted correctly and nicely, and then play the first bar nice and slowly. Okay, that's the sort of thing, that's the sort of speed that you should be achieving. And all of my demonstrations in this lesson and also in future lessons, they will not be performance speed, okay? I will be demonstrating what you should be aiming for as someone learning from scratch, okay? Because I think one of the things that happens with YouTube videos is we get set false impressions of what we should be achieving, because the demonstrations come from extremely proficient players who will give you their performance standard with all their fills and embellishments on, and it can feel like we are a million miles from their performance, whereas actually it's quite normal to be starting out really slowly, and perhaps after a few days or a few weeks or of practice to have actually a fairly basic version of the piece. And my demonstrations will aim to give you something realistic that you can aim for. And again. Okay, so I'm feeling confident that I've got that first measure weighed off. I'm now going to move on. Okay, so the next measure is based on the F chord. And remember, I mentioned earlier when we reviewed the tab, there's that little eighth in there. Okay, so that's the second bar. So what I can now do is put both of those together. Okay, there's a little string mute there. I was not quite fingering it correctly. So don't allow that sort of thing. It happens to everyone. I've got real faffy fingers. I'm forever doing little string mutes, and I kind of need to work on my own technique in that respect. But don't accept it. Try and improve it each time and make sure that you're doing it as accurately as you can. And if you're doing accuracy slowly, then you'll be more accurate when you want to speed things up. Okay, so let's have another go then of those two bars. Okay. That demonstrates my point. I'm not going to teach the whole thing like that. That's what I would expect you to do, and it's what I would do when learning a new piece of music. Yes, we need to think about the alternating thumb, but also we can go straight in and just learn the bars slowly but surely and build them up a little piece at a time. It's a really effective way of learning. Okay, my next top tip is video yourself. Really good reasons for doing this. First of all, what you want to do is you want to be able to look at yourself playing, and probably with this piece, probably one of the things that you want to focus on is look at the video of your thumb moving. You'll probably find that you can't hear yourself playing when you're playing live. And the reason for that is you're learning a new skills-based task, and generally speaking, what the brain tends to do is filter out noise because it's concentrating on hand-eye coordination. Okay, so you might think you're hearing everything, but actually you'll be surprised, you'll be missing quite a bit. So if you video yourself, you can then look at and hear the way you're playing, and you'll probably find that if you listen, the bass is not really coming through as it should. And you might find if you look at your thumb, you thought you were playing an alternating bass, but actually it's dropped out in places, or one of the other fingers is sort of distracting it and pulling it away. Okay, so if that happens, go back to that measure, slow right down, and just force yourself to play the right thing. But videoing is a really good technique for visually checking and also hearing and making sure that you're playing what you think you're playing. You'll probably be disappointed when you first start listening to yourself. It's often, if you've not videoed yourself or videoed or recorded yourself before, it can be quite disappointing to hear you're not quite as good as you are. But don't worry, don't get disheartened. You will improve. Just keep the practice up and keep the consistency. Timing is really key. So I've provided a timing track. So this is a version of Guitar Pro playing the piece. So it's bang on time and completely accurate as well because it's a computer playing it. I've put the video on at 50% of the speed and also at 100% as well, so that you should be able to practice along with those pieces. And don't forget, you've also got the YouTube speed controls as well. So use those and set yourself a speed for playing along with, but also use a metronome as well. And then finally, just a kind of a word of encouragement really. It's normal to feel like your music when you first start a new piece is very mechanical and it doesn't feel very musical. That is completely normal. Don't expect too much too soon, especially in those early days where you're breaking it down bar by bar and going very slowly. It might not feel very musical or joyful at all, but I promise you, stick with it. The music will come in time. Once you start learning those bars and putting them all together, and once you can start playing a little bit more automatically, you'll then start hearing the music and it will start becoming a much more enjoyable process. So stick with it. And the other thing that is really, really powerful and really useful, and a lot of people don't understand or realize, is that actually just the process of sleeping on something and then returning back to it the next day, your brain does a lot of processing overnight, and you'll be surprised what you found difficult on one day. Sleep on it, as the phrase goes, and you'll find that the next day it might be just a little bit easier. So little and often is the key. Good luck. I really want to get feedback from you if you're enjoying the process, if this lesson is what you hope it to be, or if you want more advice, then just let me know. Leave a comment in the comments below. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're interested in the full sequence of lessons, I'm running a course throughout 2025, which is in beta mode. It's free at the moment. And then in 2026, it will be a paid membership. So if you're interested, go to the link on the page, enroll and sign up for 12 months of free fingerstyle lessons. Okay, I look forward to hearing from you. Take care and good luck.